I've got a story for you. It happened to me last Halloween. I didn't tell many people because I don't know if they believe me. You can decide if you believe it, but I swear it's true. I was walking down Hollow Grove Lane, cutting across the old abandoned neighborhoods on my way to meet some friends. I've always thought this area was kind of creepy, but on Halloween, it's like something extra strange fills the air. I remember looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me. I shook it off and kept walking. There's this house at the end of Hollow Grove Lane. I'd heard stories about it. People say it's haunted, that it's been empty for years, but sometimes they still see lights in the windows. I'd never dared to go near it, but for some reason that night, I felt drawn to it, like the house itself was calling me. Before I knew it, I was standing at the door. My heart was pounding, but it was like I couldn't control myself. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The place smelled like mildew and rot, like it had been shut up for decades, but there was this light coming from upstairs, flickering like a candle. I told myself I'd just peek and then I'd get out of there. I walked down the hallway, each step echoing. The floorboards groaned under me and I swear I could hear whispering. I looked at the portraits on the wall, old black and white photos of people who looked almost familiar. Their eyes seemed to follow me. I shook it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. I reached the end of the hall and found a room lit by a single candle. The strangest part, the candle was new, barely melted, like someone had just lit it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I called out, half expecting someone to answer, but only silence replied. That's when I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound from somewhere behind me. I turned around, and there, in the shadows, was something. I could barely make it out, just a figure in the dark. I felt this intense coldness wash over me. My heart was racing. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. Then, as the candle flickered, the figure moved. It didn't walk or glide, it just sort of shifted closer, like it was a part of the darkness itself. I snapped out of it and bolted back down the hallway, but the hall seemed longer, like it was stretching out in front of me. I glanced at the portraits again, and I swear their faces had changed. Eyes wide, mouths open as if screaming. The front door looked so far away, but I ran as fast as I could, that whispering sound growing louder. I reached the front door and tried to yank it open, but it wouldn't budge. And then I felt that chill again, right behind me. I turned and the figure was there, closer than ever, reaching out with a dark, twisted hand. I swear I could feel it grabbing my arm, its touch colder than ice. Somehow the door swung open and I stumbled out into the street. I looked back, expecting to see the figure there, but there was nothing. The house just stood there, dark and empty like it had always been. I didn't stick around to figure out what happened, I just ran. And every Halloween since, I avoid Hollow Grove Lane, but sometimes I still feel like something's watching me. So yeah, that's my Halloween story. Maybe you believe me, maybe you don't. But if you ever find yourself on Hollow Grove Lane, just keep walking, don't look back. I've never told anyone this before, but every Halloween, my aunt's house feels off. It's this old 3-story house at the end of an empty street. Big windows, peeling paint, like it's hiding something. Every time the wind blows, it creaks like it's breathing. This year, my aunt went to visit family, so I stayed to house sit. It was around 8 p.m., and I was just settling in with some tea, getting ready for the trick-or-treaters. Then I hear a faint knock. Not loud, just soft, like someone barely wants to be heard. I figured it was a kid, but when I opened the door, there was no one there. The porch light buzzed and flickered, casting weird, stretched shadows across the yard. I squinted into the night, but saw nothing. Felt this strange, heavy stillness. Then I heard the knock again, but this time it came from inside the house. I didn't know what to think, but I knew I had to check. Moving through the halls felt like stepping into someone else's memory. Shadows curled along the walls, and my steps seemed louder in the silence. Every door I passed looked like it was watching me. When I reached the dining room, a chill crept over me, like someone had left a window open, but everything was shut. And then I noticed something. A figure in the corner, just barely visible. It looked like an old man, hunched, draped in this ragged black cloak with his head bowed. I could barely make out his face, but his eyes. They were dark, empty pits. He didn't say anything, just stared. Then he lifted a hand, moving like sandpaper on wood, his fingers curling as if calling me closer. There was a faint smell in the air like earth or something rotting. I panicked. I turned and ran, my heart pounding as I stumbled through the halls. Every corner seemed to twist, and I swear it felt like the house was closing in on me. Behind me, I heard that faint shuffling again, the old man's heavy, scraping steps. I didn't dare look back. Every light I passed flickered and went out, one by one, until I was surrounded by darkness at the front door. I thought I was safe, but when I turned, I was back in the living room. And there he was, in my aunt's armchair, staring at me with those hollow eyes. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. He raised a hand slowly and pointed toward the staircase. The silence pressed on my ears, thick and suffocating. I understood. He wanted me to go upstairs. Everything in me wanted to resist, but somehow I found myself moving up the stairs. Each step was slower than the last. The air felt colder, and halfway up I swear I felt something breathing against my neck. At the top I saw a faint light under the door of my aunt's room. I gripped the doorknob, heart racing, and turned it slowly. The room was empty, but the bed looked disturbed, like someone had been lying there. I took a few steps closer and saw it. A dark handprint smeared across the pillow, like someone had been dragged. Then, in the mirror, I saw him again, right behind me, closer than before, his fingers reaching out. I bolted, nearly tripping as I flew down the stairs. The house groaned, like it was angry I was leaving. His shuffling footsteps echoed behind me, getting closer with each step. My breath was loud, desperate. At the front door, I finally felt the air against my face. I threw it open and stumbled out, too scared to look back. But I did. And there he was, standing in the doorway, watching me, like he'd been waiting all along. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just a Halloween scare. But then my aunt called. She asked if I'd noticed anything strange because when she got back, her bed was disturbed and there was a dark handprint on her pillow. And since then, she says she's not alone anymore. Every night she hears faint footsteps, following her from room to room. It was late October, just a couple of days before Halloween. I was driving back from my friend's house after an evening of ghost stories and cider. The back road was practically deserted, the kind that made you double-check your doors were locked. I was only a few miles from home when I noticed a dim glow off to the right, deep within a field of corn. The glow felt strange. I couldn't just ignore it. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and stepped out. An odd stillness settled around me, like the world was holding its breath. As I stood there, I recalled the tales we had shared earlier that night, of restless spirits wandering on Halloween, searching for something lost. A chill ran down my spine as I thought of the old legend about the scarecrows coming to life when the veil between worlds was thinnest, a time when mischief and fear danced hand in hand. Halloween wasn't just a night for costumes and candy. It was a night when the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, and anyone brave enough could stumble into something they never expected. With only my phone light to guide me, I crept down a narrow path between towering stalks. Every so often, I'd stop, certain I'd heard a second set of footsteps behind me, but each time I turned, there was nothing but endless rows of corn. The light was just ahead now, an odd circle of brightness, and I felt something old and dreadful about it. But it was curiosity as much as fear that pulled me forward. The scarecrows stood at odd angles, each seeming to stare at a different part of the field. Their eyes were hollow as though carved from wood, yet somehow they felt aware. I took a shaky step back, and that's when I heard it. The nearest scarecrow moved, its head turned to look at me, and the empty sockets where eyes should be seemed to pulse. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot as one by one the other scarecrows lifted their heads. I turned and ran, sprinting down the path as the shadows closed in. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could do was run, with that terrible whisper growing louder, as if the scarecrows themselves were chanting my name. I broke through the final row of corn, my lungs burning, and practically fell onto the road. Gasping for breath, I looked back, but there was nothing. Just a sea of still corn. As I climbed into the car, I stole one last look at the cornfield. That terrible, eerie glow appeared again, barely visible but unmistakable. Just before I sped away, I heard something. A faint laugh, like a distant, mocking whisper that chased me all the way home.